Ronia, the Robber's Daughter, Chapter 6. It went on snowing that night over Matt's fort and the surrounding woods, and even Noddle Pete could not remember a worse snowstorm. It took 4 men to push back the great fortress gate, enough just for a man to squeeze out and dig away the worst of the snow. Noddle Pete stuck his nose out and saw the desolate white landscape where everything was now hidden under the snow. The Wolf's Neck was completely walled up. No one was going to be able to get through that tunneled path until spring, if the winter went on as it had begun, said Noddle Pete. Listen, Fool Ox, he said, if digging snow is what you like best, I can promise you much joy for quite a time. Noddle Pete's predictions were usually right, and he was right this time too. For a long time the snow fell, day and night. The robbers dug and swore, but at least there was one thing in their favor. They no longer needed to keep watch on Borka's followers, either at the Wolf's Neck or at Hell's Gap.
Of course, that Borka is more stupid than a pig, said Matt, but he's not quite so impossibly stupid as to want to fight in snow up to his armpits.
Matt was not that stupid either, and in any case, he was not particularly troubled about Borka just now. He had other things to think about. Ronia was ill for the first time in her life. The morning after the day in the wintry forest, which had so nearly been her last, she woke up with a high fever and felt, to her astonishment, that she had no desire at all to get up and start living, as she usually did.
"What's the matter with you?" shouted Matt, flinging himself on his knees by her bed. "What are you saying? You're not really ill, are you?"
He took her hand and felt how hot it was. In fact, her whole body was burning, he realized, and he grew frightened. He had never seen her like this before. She had been bursting with health all her life. But here she lay now, this daughter whom he loved so much, and at once he knew what was going to happen. Ronia was going to be taken from him. She was going to die. He felt it until his heart was sore within him, and he had no idea what to do with his terrible sorrow. He would have liked to bang his head against the wall and bellow as he used to do. But he must not terrify that poor child. At least he had enough sense for that. So he simply laid his hand on her burning forehead and murmured, "It's a good thing to keep warm, my Ronia. That's what you have to do when you're ill." But Ronia knew her father, and in spite of the fever burning inside her, she tried to comfort him. "Don't be silly, Matt. This is nothing. It could have been much worse." "It could have been so much worse that I might have lain hidden under the snow from winter to spring," she thought. Poor Matt. Once again she imagined how it would have tortured him, and tears rose to her eyes. Matt saw them and thought she was lying there mourning because she was to die so young.
"Oh, my little one, you'll soon be fit again. Don't cry," he said, swallowing back his own sobs bravely. "But where's your mother?" he roared and rushed weeping to the door. Why was Lovis not standing ready with her soothing herbs when Ronia's life was hanging by a hair, he would like to know? He looked for Lovis in the sheepfold, but she was not there. The sheep bleated hungrily in their pen, but they soon realized that the right person had not arrived. For this one stood with his shaggy head bowed on the edge of the pen, crying so desperately that they were all scared to death. Matt went on bawling until Lovis, having finished her duties with the goats and chickens, walked in through the door. Then he roared, "Woman, why are you not with your sick child?" "Have I a sick child?" was Lovis's calm reply. "I didn't know. But as soon as I have given the sheep what they need—" "I can do that! Go to Ronia!" he shouted, and then he snuffled more quietly. "If she's still alive." He began to toss out bundles of aspen from their provisions. When Lovis had gone, he fed the sheep and lamented to them. "You don't know what it's like having children. You don't know what it feels like to lose your dearest little lamb." He stopped suddenly,
remembering that they all had lambs in the spring. And what had become of them? Nothing but roast mutton. Lovis gave her daughter soothing juices to drink, and in 3 days Ronia was well again, to Mat's amazement and joy. Ronia was herself again, though perhaps a little more thoughtful than before. She had done a lot of thinking during her 3 days in bed. What was going to happen now with Burke? She had a brother, yes, but how were they ever going to meet? It would have to be in secret. She could never tell Matt that she had Borka for a friend. It would be like hitting him over the head with a sledgehammer, only much worse, and he would be more heartbroken and more furious than ever before. Ronia sighed. Why did her father have to be so violent about everything? No matter whether he was happy or angry, it was always the same. He was savage and stormy enough for a whole band of robbers. Ronia was not used to lying to her father. She just kept quiet about anything she knew was going to make him sad or angry, or both sad and angry, which he would be if she told him about Burke. But it could not be helped. Now that she had a brother, she wanted to be with him, even if she had to sneak away to do it. But where could she steal to in all this snow? She could not get out into the forest because the wolf's neck was blocked. And in any case, these winter woods scared her a little. She had had enough of them for a while. The snowstorms continued to whine around Matt's fort, getting a little worse all the time. And at last Ronia realized just how bad things were. She would not be able to see Burke again until spring. He was as far away from her as if there were 1,000 miles between them. It was all the snow's fault. Ronia became more and more annoyed with it with each day that passed, and the robbers loathed it as much as she did. They cast lots every morning for guard duty. Some of them had to labor up the path to the spring where they fetched the water. It was halfway to the Wolf's Neck, and it was hard work getting there, with the snow whirling around your ears, and then lugging back heavy buckets of water, enough for both men and beasts. "You're as idle as oxen," Lovis accused the men, "except when you're fighting and robbing. Then you work hard." And the idle robbers looked forward to spring, when their robber's life could start again. They passed the long hours of waiting by shoveling more and more snow, and cutting new skis, and looking after their weapons, and grooming their horses, and playing dice, and dancing robber dances, and singing robber ditties in front of the fire, as they had always done. Ronia played dice with them, and sang and danced as well. But she was looking forward to spring just as much as the robbers were, and to her woods in springtime. Then, at last, she would see Burke again. They would be able to talk, and she could find out if he really did want to be her brother, as he had promised out in the snowstorm. But waiting was hard, and Ronia hated being shut in. It made her restless, and the days seemed long. So one day she made her way down to the underground cellar vaults, where she had not been for a long time. Old dungeons were something she did not care for, and there were many of them down there, blasted into the rock wall. Of course, Noddle Pete insisted that nobody had been kept captive there since time immemorial, when great men and small kings had ruled from Matt's fort, long before it had become a robber stronghold. All the same, when Ronia came down into the musty cold of the vaults, she felt that something of the moaning and sighing of those long-dead prisoners still clung to the rock walls, and it gave her a creepy feeling. She lit up the darkness of the dungeons with her horn lantern, the corners where the poor wretches had lived without hope of ever again seeing the light of day. She stood quietly for a while, grieving for the cruelties that had taken place in Matt's fort. Then, with a shudder, she pulled her wolfskin coat closer around her and trudged on through the underground passages that stretched past the dungeons under the entire fortress. She had been there with Noddle Pete, and he was the one who had shown her what the storm had done on the night when she was born. Not content with opening up Hell's Gap, it had crushed the rock directly under the gap as well, and therefore the underground passage had caved in the middle and filled up with rubble. "This is the end. Here you must stop," said Ronia, just as Noddle Pete had said when she had been there with him. But then she began to think. On the other side of the rock fall, the passage went on. She knew, for Noddle Pete had told her that too. It had always irritated her that she could go no farther, and now more than ever because, who could tell, surely somewhere on the other side of all this rubble there would be Berk. She stood gazing thoughtfully at the heaps of fallen stones, and at last her thinking was done. For some time after that they saw little of Ronia in the stone hall. She disappeared every morning, no one knew where, and neither Matt nor Lovis wondered where she was. Of course she would be shoveling snow like all the others, they thought, and in any case they were used to her coming and going as she liked. But Ronia was not shoveling snow. She was moving rubble until her arms and back ached, and when she tumbled into bed at night, exhausted, there was one thing she knew for sure. Never again in her life was she going to move stones, big or little. But morning had scarcely dawned before she was back in the underground passage, setting to with furious energy, filling bucket after bucket with stones. She hated them, all those heaped-up stones, so much that they should have melted. But they did not. They continued to lie there, and she herself had to haul them away, bucket by bucket, and empty them in the nearest dungeon. There came a day when the dungeon was full and the heap of stones had sunk to a point where, with a bit of difficulty, it should be possible to climb over to the other side, if she dared. Now Ronia knew it was time to think. Did she dare walk straight into Borka's keep? And what would happen to her there? She did not know, but what she did know was that she was on dangerous ground. All the same, there was nothing so dangerous that she would not try it in order to reach Berk. She longed for him. How that had happened she had no idea. After all, she had detested him, and wished him and all the Borka robbers at the bottom of Hell's Gap. And now here she stood, wanting only to reach the other side of the rubble and see if she could find Berk. Then she heard something. There was someone coming on the other side. She could hear footsteps. Who could it be but a Borka robber? She held her breath and stood stock still, not daring to move, listening and wishing she were far away before whoever was on the other side of the pile of stones discovered she was there. Then the Borka robber began to whistle, a simple little tune she had heard before. Yes, indeed, she had heard it before. Berk had been whistling in it when he was struggling to free her from the rump-hob's hole. Could it be Berk in there, so close to her? Or did all the Borka robbers whistle that particular tune? She was burning to find out, but she could not very well ask. That would be dangerous. All the same, she must find out somehow who the whistler was. So she decided to whistle too, the same tune, very softly. There was silence on the other side. For a long time it was horribly quiet, and she was making ready to rush off if an unknown Borka robber suddenly came scrambling over the rubble to get his hands on her. But then she heard Berk's voice, low and hesitant, as if he did not know what to expect. "Ronia?" "Berk!" she shouted, so tremendously happy that she almost lost her breath. "Berk! Oh, Berk!" Then she stopped. After a moment she said, "Is it true that you want to be my brother?" She heard him laughing on the other side of the rubble. "My sister," he said, "I like hearing your voice, but I would like to see you, too. Are you as black-eyed as you used to be?" "Come and see," said Ronia. She got no further because now she had heard something else, something that took her breath away and silenced her. She heard the heavy cellar door far away behind her, opening and closing again with a bang. And now someone was coming down the steps. Yes, someone was coming, and if she could not work out what to do very quickly, she was lost, and so was Burke. She heard footsteps coming closer and closer. Someone was coming softly and inexorably down the long corridor. She heard, and she knew what it meant. Yet she stood there like an idiot, motionless with terror. It was almost too late when she suddenly came back to life and whispered quickly to Burke, "Tomorrow." Then she ran to meet whoever was coming. Whoever he was, he must be prevented from seeing what she had been doing with the tumbled stones. It was not old Pete, and his face brightened when he saw her. "How I've searched," he said. "What in the name of all the wild harpies have you been doing?" She took him briskly by the arm and turned him around before it was too late. "You can't shovel snow all the time," she said. "Come on. I want to get out of here." Indeed she did. It was only now that she realized what she had done. She had opened a way up into Borka's keep. If Matt only knew. He might not have the cunning of a fox, but at least he would understand that here, at last, was a way of getting at Borka. He could have worked it out for himself long ago, thought Ronia, but she was glad he had not done so. It was strange, but she no longer wanted to have the Borka robbers thrown out of Matt's fort. They must be allowed to stay here for Burke's sake. Burke must not be thrown out, and if she could prevent it, no one was going to get into Borka's keep by the way she had opened up. So she must make sure now that Noddle Pete did not start thinking any unnecessary thoughts. There he was, walking beside her, looking very knowing, though that was his usual expression. It was easy to imagine that he knew all their secrets, but however artful he was, this time Ronia was more artful still. He had not discovered her secret. Not yet, at least. No, you can't shovel snow all the time," Noddle Pete agreed. "But you can play dice night and day, don't you think, Ronia?" "You can play dice night and day, and especially now," said Ronia, dragging him enthusiastically up the steep cellar steps. She played dice with Noddle Pete until it was time for the wolf song. But Burke was always in her thoughts. Tomorrow. That was the last thing she thought before she fell asleep that night. Tomorrow.